All right, so good morning, everybody. Thank you all for joining our GBAT.net webinar this morning on STEM education. I'm very excited to introduce our speaker this morning. But before I get started, a little bit of upkeep. So this is our second webinar for the year, and we do have our March speaker already planned out. So if you like joining us for our webinars, you can anticipate our March webinar being given by another one of our GBAT.net student scholars who is currently working on their PhD. And his name is Pedro Monaco, and he will be talking to us next month about bat research and biogeography. So if you would be interested in that, please be on the lookout on the GBAT.net Facebook, and we will be posting more information about that later. But today we will be focusing on STEM education, and we have a guest speaker today who's tuning in from, I think I saw Maine. So welcome to Dr. Anica Miller-Rushing, who will be doing our talk today. So without further ado, welcome, Anica.
Thank you so much, Dana. And thank you to all of you for hosting me and wanting to to hear more about this work and thinking about how we can think about informal science education and how we do evaluation and research techniques in ways that maybe are a little different than some of the regular sort of standard pre and post surveys. So my name is Anica Miller-Rushing. I work at Associated Universities, Inc., which, if you've heard of, it's a nonprofit that works on astronomy and big science labs kind of around the world. And a lot of my work is thinking about the projects that AUI is doing and how can we evaluate and do the research on the STEM education that is happening at these centers. And my PhD I got from the University of Maine, and I focused in my PhD on using qualitative methods and discourse analysis to think about teachers, agency and identity and autonomy and how those all play out in science classrooms. So my work at AUI spans a lot of different kinds of projects, and I've had a really wonderful opportunities to work across formal, informal settings. I also consult for a state. I am in Maine, so you can see in the chat. So home is in Maine, and I consult for a statewide nature education centers as well. So I've seen kind of science education and what that looks like in lots of different settings. Classrooms, out of the classrooms, museums, learning centers, all kinds of spaces. And when I wear my research and evaluation hat, one of the things I'm trying to do is make sure that the projects and the work that is happening with the programming on those ends is really effective. And we're answering the questions that we need to answer. Like, are these projects working? In what ways? What ways can they be improved? What are people actually getting out of them? Those are the kinds of questions that we need to get. And at the same time, most of us, don't want to answer 45-minute surveys again and again. So trying to think about how to get that data in really unique ways is something that's fun for me to think about. So that's what we're going to be talking about today. But I do want to just say up front, and I'll say it again at the end, if at any point you have any questions and you're just thinking about a project and your research questions and you're wondering how could you get data in maybe a different way, or an alternative way or an additional way, I'm happy to talk with you through those. So I am a resource that AUI allows me to kind of have flexibility over my time. And so if there is something that you want to just chat with me about individually, I'm happy to do that. Or if I don't know, I can maybe try to find somebody else who can. So please use me as a resource if that is all useful for you. I will have time at the end also for questions and talks, but if at any point as I'm talking, I can't really follow the chat super closely, but I'll try. So either just holler out or put it in the chat, and I'm assuming Dana can help me with that. So if anyone has any questions while I'm chatting, please feel free to holler out. I'm not super formal about these kinds of things. Okay, so thinking about evaluation metrics. What do I mean by that? Evaluation, so if I was at an NSF research infrastructure workshop, and part of the narrative in the literature about what does evaluation mean, um, I thought was an interesting quote. It was, evaluation is crucial for education and outreach programs as it provides a systemic and objective assessment of their effectiveness, allowing for informed decision making, continuous improvement, and the enhancement of overall outcomes. And I think that is a great reminder of why we do evaluation metrics. And I would also, though, add a yes and or a yes but here, because how do we do this in a way that strengthens our data and goes beyond what can often be limiting just pre and post survey data? Because if we're not actually using these assessments and really looking at the assessments and getting the kinds of metrics that really help us, and don't and our programming staff is able to implement in a way that works really well, if those all can't come together, then we know these evaluation metrics just don't get used as much, and they don't get as, they're just not as effective. So we really want to, the evaluation metrics are incredibly important, but we also need to remember how we get those metrics and the methods that we use in order to do that, and then use them and inform our work. So I was trained as an ecologist. My undergrad is in ecology and biology, and I worked in ecology labs for multiple summers when I was a teacher in K-12. So I used to teach elementary when many years ago, and had a great time doing it. But I would be in these ecology field labs in the summers, and so I'm kind of, I think a lot about what we get from ecology. And one of those big lessons is diversifying. If you have a diverse ecology, we have a stronger ecosystem. And I take that to thinking about our research as well. Our research can be stronger if we look to diversify the type of data we collect. We all know pre and post surveys are a go-to for many reasons, and those are good reasons. They're easy to use. The Likert scales are easily quantifiable, feels like a known and maybe a thus recognizable and more comfortable data collection tool. But we also know these have their own limitations. Self-reported data is often skewed, not as accessible for some. It's so known, it's often boring to complete, and thus often not completed by all attendees, etc. And kids often, don't like to really do pre and post surveys. And what you can ask and how those questions are, it can be a little bit different if you're also thinking about kids. So if we're thinking about informal learning spaces with all ages, sometimes we need to think about really diversifying our kinds of data that we're getting. So I'm in favor of broadening our evaluation data and trying to remember to diversify the type of data we collect. But when I think about how do I do that, right? How do I diversify my data? Like, okay, what do I go to? Where are my ideas? And I think about professional K-12 teachers don't survey their students all the time, and yet they get data on what their students are learning constantly. Every teacher will tell you the standardized testing they do have to do takes up far too much time already. So instead, they prefer to collect a diverse variety of evaluative data from their students. Teachers talk a lot about the different types of evaluation measures they use. Some are diagnostic, some are formative, meaning they are evaluating the learning that is forming or is in process, and some is more summative or more of an overall final perspective. So today I want to bring up some examples and ideas that are more formative and can be grabbed as data, but are also learning experiences for those people you're evaluating. Because often, at least in my work, when I work with the programming staff to come up with whatever learning experience is happening, their time is limited. And so can we So can I get data at the same time that the learning is happening? And how can we set up that learning experience so that we can grab that data in a really effective way? So often I honestly just keep kind of lists like this around. And if I'm going through a learning experience and I'm helping to develop it with the programming staff, and thinking about how can I grab evaluation data, I'm often thinking about like, what are the pedagogies, what are the learning choices, kinds of actions that we're putting in place, and how can I get data from those actions? So this is by no means a complete list of options if you could look to, but if I was doing a professional development or running a program where I was evaluating learning outcomes, these are some of the activities they could do in which the attendees would be learning while doing, and which I could take back with me as a researcher and use as data to evaluate that learning. And I want to point out that these could be done with any age learner. So when I think about even like the first one, a Venn diagram, it doesn't have to just be with kids you do this kind of stuff. I have done conferences with adults, and they can create Venn diagrams, and those are really important data that I can grab. I would have different expectations as to the outcomes, based on the age grade or prior experiences, but these can be used as learning opportunities as well as evaluation measures that are just beyond kind of what we're thinking about in addition to or in exchange for some of these pre-post surveys. So thinking about like that Venn diagram, if you have them do something like a Venn diagram in the beginning, and then think about how that having them reassess that in the middle of that learning or at the end, you can really see the changes in their thinking and what they're considering in the learning. We can think about, there's a lot of research around modeling and how we research models that learners are creating. And so we can think about sort of a lot of evaluation, if you're really struggling with thinking about how do I really know it's rigorously I'm evaluating this? Like, okay, they've given me this picture of a Venn diagram, or they've given me a word web. Like, how do I then evaluate that? And how do I make sure that that is rigorously done? There's a lot of data out there, a lot of manuscripts and things on using models as evaluative aspects of learning activities. So if you're looking for that, I can provide a lot more of those citations if that's of interest. So all those are some ideas that teachers use all the time that we can also grab as evaluation and or research data. I'll give it I'll give some examples of this just to give you a better sense of like how I've actually used it in an actual program. So like I said, I work in Maine. I do consulting as part of a group called Maine Outdoor Schools for All, which has nature centers where they are hosting students in multi-day programs. And so they created these postcards. So if you can see on this postcard, this is just a blank one. And basically at the end of they usually were in 3-day programs, but it changes. They were looking to get more expansive evaluation data on their programs. And these groups really needed to deepen their understanding of the learning experiences that were happening from the learners and the youth perspective. So, clicking through surveys are not ideal for upper elementary and middle school students, who is the target age for this program, and as you can imagine, for so many reasons. So, along with data captured from other activities throughout the 3-day program, we designed a postcard that they filled out during the last moments of learning experience. We prompted a few open-ended responses and gave them room to write a postcard to themselves answering those prompts, and gave them the front of the postcard to draw a picture of whatever they wanted to represent their learning while at the nature center. Then I took a copy of the postcards before mailing them to their schools 2 weeks later. That way I got the data and they got a postcard reminding themselves of their experience, and a reminder to the teacher to keep helping the students process and reflect on the experience. What really worked about this tool was that the writing did not feel intimidatingly long for the students. They were more invested since they were writing to themselves, and it gave them a writing and a drawing component, so they got to show their thinking in multiple ways. I do want to point out, though, that this was a part of a more expansive evaluation protocol that included other formative assessments, but also some traditional surveys as well, especially to the teachers and parents of the students. So it doesn't have to be all or nothing, and yet there are ways of getting data that can also be part of the student's learning. And what is also important to point out is that this was an evaluation tool that we then replicated and used across the network of nature centers that were all part of a learning collaborative of sorts across Maine. And the centers were able to consider the patterns, anomalies, and findings broken out by center or across the whole network. It was an easily implementable, it was adaptable, and it was a replicable tool that gave good evaluation data, but was also part of the learning experience. And again, one of the questions that often get is that if this feels maybe intimidating to you to actually evaluate, because now you have a picture and you have a bunch of qualitative data. And so how do you really evaluate that? And we can talk, there's all kinds of ways to code qualitative data to really, and pictures. Again, going back to modeling, there's a lot of citations around how to code modeling. And there's a lot of citations around how to code out for qualitative data. And if you're looking for those kinds of citations, I can help you kind of figure out what kinds of coding you're looking for. But there's lots of really easy ways to start coding out qualitative data that can really help you create that analytical, that rigorous analytical framing. So that's one example. Another example is a journal that I have used at a part of a 3-day conference. So attendees filled in a Google form each day that encouraged reflection and evaluation of how the conference was progressing for them. It looked like this. It was just a quick digital journal, and it helped. Again, it just asked them a few really basic questions. It was, what did you learn today? What excites you about the idea of Cosmovision's network? This was the thing we were doing. What makes you nervous or concerned? How do you see yourself in this network? And what questions do you have? And anything else you want to consider or share. As you can see, people were given the freedom to answer as much or as little as they wanted. Again, very qualitative. They were prompted each day with the same questions, so it felt known and easy to accomplish. It also gave us really quick data to look at the end of each day, and we could then modify the next day's agenda as needed based on real-time data. So at the end of the day, I would pull up the Google form, look through all the answers really quickly, and if they had questions or anything they were really concerned with, or something they didn't like, or something they really did like, we could modify the agenda based on their responses. And that actually happened. So they really got into these for example, they really got into these presentations that all the attendees were doing. And so they wanted more time for that. So we actually just modified it and gave more time for those. And also were able to answer questions pretty quickly, which made everyone feel like they were having a more effective time at the conference. And then the data that we were able to get on things like what excites you and what makes you nervous and all those kinds of things were helped to inform the research that I'm collecting on how that network is growing. So our research questions for this project are around how is this network growing? How is it developing? How is it, what are the hiccups? What are the challenges? What are the successes that this network is experiencing? And how can we use that to inform networks and network growth in general? And especially in this kind of, this network in particular is working in a very multidisciplinary space. And so they're really trying to think about that. So this was a really quick 3-minute digital journal. It was really easy for them to click on. It was really easy for me to get the data. And it was another easy way to get the information. Another example, some of you might want more of a specific research technique that can be used in a truly more, I would say there is a lot of methodology around this, and one of the techniques that we use a lot in my work at AUI is social network analysis. It's a specific research technique. I use it across multiple projects because a lot of AUI's work is thinking around networks and growing networks of networks. And so we have to analyze those networks. So if you're working in networks, which I'm guessing many of you are, because I was invited to come do this presentation because of my work on an NSF funded ExcelNet project called AstroExcel. And so GBAT Network and AstroExcel are all part of these groups that are trying to grow these like really informative and effective networks, and either network of networks or just a big network. But how we understand these networks working can be really useful information, and can inform how other networks can learn from us as well. So AstroExcel, this project that I'm on, uses a network of networks to leverage transformative change in the areas of astronomy, education, communication, engagement, and culture. And one way we're measuring that change is by analyzing the network with social network analysis options. So I thought I'd share that option as well. So social network analysis often creates visualizations based on the data in order to grapple with so many connections. It can be helpful to see not only who and what make up the network, but how they're connected. So this is, for example, a two-mode network of people, organizations, and organizing committees, and is constructed from affiliation data gathered in, I did have to do a survey for this, a survey from August of 2024, on the AstroExcel counseling for organizing group members. I looked at all of 2023 data for this picture that you're seeing. It represents a baseline or foundation in core connections for the AstroExcel project to build out collaborations and network sort of folding, like how these are integrating and coming in and out of their work with each other. So to understand how we grow and transform, we need to know where we're starting. And this visualization creates the foundation of the social network analysis of AstroExcel. So this is what AstroExcel's network looked like in year one if we create a visualization based on the survey questions that I asked them. So those survey questions to do network analysis is a lot of who are you talking to? What networks are you part of? How connected are you? How many times are you talking to these people? In what kinds of ways are you connected? Are you publishing with them? Are you just in meetings with them? That kind of information. And the other reason why I'd like to share this, I shared this one with you, is because if you want, and if you start messing around with social network analysis, this software Kumu, Kumu, it's pretty easy and can be really fun. So you don't have to do social network analysis in R or SPSS, which you can do, but if that's not a level that you want to do an analysis on, Kumu can be kind of a pretty easy space to get the data that you need without having to make it quite as in-depth as using R or something like that for software. Kumu makes it really fun to play with the data, click on the nodes, move them around, and be able to deep dive into the sections as you like. The data is anonymous. I've made the data anonymous in Kumu, so if you click on that QR code, you can play around with it. You can see what it looks like. I protected the data for specific people, so you can see the name of the organizations that are part of AstroExcel, and you can also see what type of AstroExcel members are part of the network, but not their specific name, and you can see how the members and organizations networks are connected. So feel free to play around in there. And for example, I can kind of show you the different parts of the AstroExcel and more specificity a little bit. So the AstroExcel Council is those lighter blue circles. The second one is the cog, and then we have individuals. So we've got organizations that are part, so there's our individuals that are part of a council as well as a cog, and the different color representations of those circles in the legend you can see show you what they're representing. So we can see how they're linked and the directionality of those linkages. So what's also important is that if you kind of blow up your Kumu, you can see the arrows pointing to the circles and which way they're going. So I apologize. I've been traveling a lot recently. I've gotten a little bit of a head cold, so I'm apologizing if I start coughing. So by using the Kumu software in this way, we can get to know AstroExcel in deeper ways and explore areas of high or low transitivity. excuse me, meaning there are some individuals and networks with a lot of bidirectional connections, indicating high levels of collaboration, or the inverse, where there's not a high level, there's a really low level of collaboration. So we can see in this person a really high area of transitivity, meaning that this person is really connected to lots of different people, organizations, the network. And we can show areas of more low transitivity. This person is not as well connected to other organizations. They're really, I kind of think of these people as like, if I take one little snippet off that string, they're pretty much gone from the network. So they're connected to that network of networks through that one connection. And that's a pretty weak connection. So that can be seen as, that's seen as a low area of transitivity. And visualizing the networks can help generate insight about potential connections and collaborations, and also where there are structural holes that are in the network and that can be easily bridged. So analyzing our 2023 network of networks and comparing it to other years will answer questions such as, how is the network of network growing, and who is doing the brokering and connecting? Is the network of network growing in ways that is more collaborative and inclusive of new members? Are members of larger networks or associations more likely to grow the network or not? So those are the kinds of research questions that we're looking at, and that this social network analysis can help us get to those answers. So if any of you are sort of thinking about those questions in your networks, this might be a tool that you want to consider. I also, you can show, you can get really sort of dive deep into, if you use social network analysis and thinking about like one individual. In this one, it's called node 029, seen here with a red circle around their circle. We can see in light blue all the networks they're connected to, and some connection directionality going from them to a network, and some from the network to them, and some bidirectionality, meaning it's back and forth. We can also see the individuals they're connected and do the same directionality connection. So if I were playing around in Kumu right now, I could pull apart the bubbles and move them around so I can see the connections and directionality more easily. But another thing you might notice is if you click on an individual, you'll see the metrics of how we can measure these connections in a quantitative way. So earlier in this presentation, I was showing you a lot of more qualitative ways of getting data. And I don't want you to think that, quantitative isn't also really useful. So this is just part of the data we collect, and these quantitative measures, quantitative measures that you can see kind of on the left-hand side there, the betweenness, the degrees, the metrics, all that. That is a quantitative way that we can say, how strongly are these people connected to the network? In what ways? Where is their betweenness, and how many degrees of connections do they have? Those are the kinds of quantitative ways we can really measure the network and how it's growing. I also think it is important to point out, though, that as much as we are getting that quantitative, I am a qualitative researcher. I think a lot about how people, their discourse, how they are communicating, how they're communicating, and beyond just exactly what words are coming out of their mouth, how they're saying that, how they're interacting, what they're showing and trying to communicate in all kinds of ways. So we also really grab that qualitative data. It was really critical as well. And I do that through qualitative survey questions. So it's not just the number of connections they have, but like the depth of that connection. Describe for me that connection with that network. What ways is that network important to you? What ways is it not important to you? How do you feel like you're working? How do you feel like you're working with this network is going, in what ways? I do interviews, I do focus groups, I also take researcher memos. So as I'm doing all this work, I'm taking a memo and writing it down in a reflective way. I'm taking also text from reports and documents and communications. So they know when they join Astro Excel, for example, like all of our Slack communication is part of the research data that we can grab. So qualitative data is really critical as well to get a rich descriptive data. So qualitative really can't give you that sort of broad pattern data, but it can give you descriptive data that we need to collect. And that can come from lots of sources. So what you do with this qualitative data can vary, obviously, but following rigorous analytical protocols and not just pulling out anecdotal notes is really required to see the patterns and the descriptions and the themes. And this project shows you we can use some mixed methods to really do that. So in the social network analysis, we've got some quantitative data, but because we're also asking these qualitative questions as well, we can get a really good mixed methods to get great data beyond just a Likert scale pre-post, like you started the network and here's where we are now. So we're trying to really broaden and deepen that data that we're getting. So what are some of the conclusions or big take-home points? We've talked a lot about these techniques that I've just shown are just a few. They're just not even the tip of the iceberg. They're the few flakes that are just falling on the iceberg. There's so many ways to grab data while people are involved in an informal learning experience. But to grab that data that's helpful, you always need to come back to your questions. What are you aiming for? You need to know what answers you're aiming to capture so you know what data you need to collect. So depending on those questions, your data collection can be wildly different. And that's where a lot of times I come back to when people want me to start doing evaluation on a project. The first thing I'm looking for are what are their goals? What are their questions that we're trying to answer? And then we can figure out what kind of data is going to help us get to those questions. And ideally, I'm working with the programming staff on creating those learning experiences at the same time. And we're working together as a team so that we can come up with learning experiences that are going to create the kind of data that then I can use in a more analytical fashion, but is also going to give the learning kind of experience that the programming staff is hoping for them to have. So working in conjunction is ideal. Sometimes that doesn't happen, and sometimes a learning experience happens and it's already developed, and then I can grab the data afterwards and figure out how I need to then sort of backfill to get the data that we need. And I just, want to kind of quickly remind people that to diversify beyond pre and post surveys, like how do we do that again? We need to diversify the data. So we need to aim to get more qualitative or descriptive data and to make it more fun for your participants to generate that data you need. So you can think about really diversifying your data set, make it more fun. Also think about ways of having those learning experiences happen in a way that you can grab the data from, and they won't maybe even know about that you're getting that data that way. So it doesn't have to feel evaluative to them. Find inspiration by collaborating with educators. So like I said, if I work with the educators or the programming staff from the get-go, it's the easiest way by far. Because you can determine what they're already planning on using for assessments and see what they might be able to, how they might be able to be utilized or adapted to fit your evaluation goals. But again, if you can't work with them up front in developing the learning experience or the assessment, you can backfill to get the evaluation data that you need, depending on what they're already doing. And just be willing to be creative, yet rigorous in your analysis technique. Sometimes using this kind of data can take creativity to analyze and a willingness to try other analytical methodologies beyond basic quantitative numbers. So remember, thinking about all those ways that we were thinking about the formative evaluation techniques and assessment, that big long list I showed you in the beginning. There's lots of ways to capture learning goals. And we can think about moving by using lots of different learning techniques and getting that data, we can use those for evaluation as well in those experiences that don't have to happen just in classroom settings. It can happen in any learning environment, anywhere with any ages. So what I'm hoping is that you all, I think we have some time to ask some questions. If you have any specific projects that you're really looking to, I'd be happy to think about what ways we could look at your data that could be helpful.
Okay, thank you so much. And so with that, do we have any questions from anybody? You can put them in the chat or you can feel free to raise your hand and we can call on you.
Well, while people are thinking, I'll just remind everybody that if you have a project that you're thinking of or considering or have already, or you have maybe a bunch of data from some learning experiences, but you're not maybe sure how to use it, I'm happy to be a resource if I can to help think through that. It's really fun for me, and I don't know, my brain works in a weird way that I really enjoy thinking about how we can get that data. And I really like thinking about how we can get that really, to me, that really descriptive data so we can get a really good sense of what people are trying to communicate in different ways.
I've got a quick question.
Yeah.
So do you have any, when it comes to formulating questions, do you have any tips or tricks when it comes to being able to whatever audience we're speaking to, any tips or tricks in order to get valuable descriptive data? Because I feel like that's something that, especially for individuals who are more used to gathering quantitative data, being able to apply that to getting something qualitative and more descriptive is challenging. So do you have
Yeah.
any tips or tricks that you implement?
That's a great question. Um, Often I would say my sort of go-tos are if I'm in an interview, um, I just say, what I heard was, and then can you tell me more? So if you're in an interview setting, then that's a really quick way that I often just sort of basically restate what they told me at the last part that they said. And then I said, is that correct? And can you tell me more? Um, People will continually talk, and I will do that again and again and again, and they will just keep getting more and more descriptive. Another way I do it in surveys is you can do the Likert scale or, a sliding scale or 1 to 100 of whatever. Like, let's say how much, a really broad question, like I was thinking about the project that I just got off of Cosmovisions. One of the questions in their survey was, did you feel like your voice was heard as part of the gathering? Um, and they had a sliding scale, and it was like 0 to 100. 0, they did not feel like their voice was heard at all. 100, they felt, incredibly empowered and felt like they were part of the project in a really deep way, whatever. 0 to 100, right? Sliding scale. There's a number, so we can quantify that. But then the second question I ask is, why did you answer that way? Describe why you answered that way. And then again, so just anytime you do quantitative score, just ask, why did you answer that way? And just make it a paragraph or a sentence answer that they can give. Um, and or say things like, in one word, describe your answer to that, something like that. But basically, for every quantitative one, I often add, depending on the kind of questions and who the group is and how long I can give them for a survey, those sort of things. I just ask them, like, why did you answer that way? It's
Okay.
really broad, super open-ended.
We did get some good questions in the chat.
Great.
Uh, from Joy Collins, we have, I'm designing a citizen science initiative in Guayaquil. I hope I pronounced that right. I apologize if I didn't. That recruits local residents to use acoustic detectors to gather data from urban bat species. Participants will be adults, and I want to measure perception and or knowledge change over the course of this project. I've designed a pre-post survey, but I'm curious if you have any ideas that might also help gauge any shifts in people's mindsets as they interact with the species that they likely have previously misunderstood.
Yeah. So that sounds really exciting. I wish I could come help you. That sounds really awesome. I love citizen science work. A lot of my work in the past has been on citizen science stuff. So that's really exciting to see that. So thank you for that work that you're doing, because that is adding to this great knowledge that we have. So thank you. Um, so they're adults, and I want to measure perception and knowledge change over time. Yes. So often, maybe one way that you can also think about this, I would go through and think about the list that I gave. I know they're going to give you a copy of this. So I'm trying to think, like, you could have them draw pictures, you could have them draw a model of what a model of like a metaphor of what they think of this kind of a model or a metaphor of this kind of work. So you could have them talk about that. Another thing to do could be setting up scenarios. So having them talk about their responses to certain scenarios. Um, so you could set up like just an example or a model of something, and you can have them ask about, how would they handle that scenario? What kind of knowledge do they have to answer that scenario, and what knowledge do they need to answer that scenario? Um, or what questions do they have that need to get answered to answer that scenario? So if you kind of put them in a setting of like, help us solve this problem, how would you do that? And what's your, like, what frame of reference are you using to solve that problem? You can get at their perception and their knowledge. Like, what knowledge are they using to answer that scenario? What questions do they still have? What are they thinking about? What's their frame of reference? Those are the kinds of questions you can get. So I would quickly, just super off the top of my head, I'd be thinking about giving them scenarios to consider. I'd be thinking about having them tell me what kind of ways that it could be in a metaphor. So describe this as a metaphor to me. Describe this as a model to me. What would that look like? Describe it, maybe draw a picture of it. Those are the kinds of things I'd maybe be thinking about. But I'm happy to talk about with you specifically more, and really sort of deeply think about it. And maybe ways that, if that's maybe concerning on how to code that kind of data, can be a little bit, sometimes for some, a little bit intimidating. So I'm happy to talk about those as well.
And we did have another comment, not necessarily a question, but
Mhm.
another comment in the chat from Lori, who says, "Great talk. Some of our federal or provincial funding in Canada requires more pre-post surveys to show results. It's nice to think more about the creative, natural ways to work with people and to show results from projects. Some of these surveys we are expected to do not feel natural and hard to measure." And hard to measure results in some cases, given we often work on long-lived species that are slow to recover. So that's just mostly like a good comment for you.
Yeah, and I would say, we didn't really talk about this, but our granting cycles and the data that we're trying to get from education often does not match up to how people learn, right? Like, there is a disconnect between how we learn and the process of our learning and the long-term aspects of that versus showing a report or whatever that you have to, that your project or whatever, how it impacted their learning. So, a 2 or 3 year grant cycle, and a pre and post survey is pretty limited on what you can show for actual education. I mean, that's what it is. And that's the tricky part of what we do. So I am not I am not one of those people that thinks that like one pre and post survey or one learning experience is really going to show somebody's like long-term trajectory of their learning about this kind of work that you're having them do. It's just it's yeah, that's just how it is. But at the same time, we do have logistics, right? In order to get the next grant, we need to show that our previous one was effective. So how can we do that in a way that also gives more learning opportunities to your participants? So I always think of it as like, okay, I only have so much time with these people, and I can only, ask for them to do so much work before and after and homework and all that kind of stuff. So how can I make like it maximally like effective on their learning? And if I can get data and affect their learning, and give them more opportunities to think about whatever our topic is that we're having them think about, then I think that's a win-win. And you do. There's just logistics. We have to have our, we're constantly applying for grants. We're constantly having to prove what we're doing. So it is just logistics as well. So if we can, though, make it a better learning experience and provide those logistics, and help us think about our programming effectiveness in the future, I think that's the ideal. Does it always happen? No, but we can try to keep moving toward that.
All right. Well, do we have any more questions? Nothing else popped up in the chat. Do we have any more questions that people would like to say? Um, If not, it does seem like that Dr. Miller-Rushing is more than happy to have people reach out to her to ask questions. If you
Oh,
see on the screen there, we do still have her email posted. So if you want to know more, please jot down her email address. And if you want to come back to watch this talk again, we are putting up a PDF version on the GBATnet website, and we will be posting this on the YouTube channel. So you can always come back to watch again.
yeah. Thanks, everyone. I appreciate your time and thinking about these topics. And I am weird that I love thinking about qualitative data and how can we get it and how can we really get those descriptions and how do we code that? What are the logistics of all of that? So I'm happy to, if anyone else, wants to think about those questions, I'm happy to chat.
All right. Well, thank you
Thanks,
so
everyone.
much. Thank you so much. And again, come back next month for our talk from one of our GBATnet student scholars who's currently working on his PhD, and he'll be giving a presentation on bat research in biogeography. But
Yeah, thanks everyone for your work on bats. They're so necessary for our ecology. So thank you, thank you.
thank you so much. Have a good day, everybody.
Bye.
All right. Bye.